Welcome to Guyana News Updates, your dedicated channel for insightful discussions and critical analysis of the latest developments in Guyana. In this podcast, we aim to bring you in-depth conversations with key figures and thought leaders, examining the pressing issues shaping the nation. In our inaugural episode, we delve into a wide-ranging discussion with AFC leader Nigel Hughes, as featured in a recent interview on Conversation with Rickford Burke. This engaging conversation touches upon several crucial areas impacting Guyana today. We explore the deeply concerning events in Linden, including the tragic shootings of young black men and the subsequent public outcry. Mr. Hughes shares his perspective on these events, highlighting allegations of police misconduct and a perceived lack of accountability, referencing the recommendations of a previous commission of inquiry that he argues have not been adequately addressed. The podcast also examines the broader context of governance and human rights in Guyana. Mr. Hughes discusses the perceived response of the government to these incidents and suggests the need for international scrutiny and intervention to ensure justice and adherence to the rule of law. Shifting focus, the conversation addresses the current political landscape, including the recent breakdown of coalition talks between the AFC and APNU. Mr. Hughes provides his insights into this development and responds to criticisms that have emerged. He also outlines the AFC's willingness to explore other alliances as they move towards the upcoming elections. Further critical analysis includes a discussion on equitable development and the experiences of Afro-Guyanese people. Mr. Hughes shares his reaction to the government's presentation at a United Nations forum and addresses allegations of racial disparity and the government's response to such concerns. The conversation also touches upon serious allegations of abuse of power by the government. Through this insightful conversation, we aim to provide you with a comprehensive understanding of some of the most significant issues facing Guyana today. Join us as we navigate these complex topics and strive to keep you informed and engaged with the ongoing developments. Subscribe now to Guyana News Updates and stay connected to the critical conversations shaping our nation.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a YouTube conversation, one you actually brought to us, featuring Nigel Hughes. He's the leader of the AFC, the Alliance for Change.
That's right. It's from Conversation with Rickford Burke. And Hughes covers a lot of ground, some really critical stuff happening in Guyana.
Yeah, things like coalition talks, politics generally, but also some pretty heavy allegations about corruption and recent events.
Exactly. We're looking at the shootings in Linden, what was said at that UN forum on people of African descent, claims about the government abusing power, and where things stand with the coalition talks for the next election.
Our mission here is really to unpack the main points, try and understand the different viewpoints Hughes presents in this conversation.
Absolutely. You flagged this material, listener, because it touches on some really significant political and social nerves in Guyana right now.
So let's dive in. First up, these very concerning shootings in Linden.
Yeah, Hughes starts right there. 2 recent shootings, young black men. He calls the first one, involving a man named Ronaldo. He calls it murder. Plain and simple.
Murder. That's strong language.
It is. He says there's video apparently showing the victim just running away, no confrontation, and then being shot by the police. So, a very serious accusation from him.
And the second shooting.
Equally tragic, based on his account.
Yeah.
There was a protest, which he says wasn't initially violent, but police used live rounds. A man named Keon Fujane was killed.
Okay.
And Hughes makes a point of saying this man, Fujane, wasn't even part of the protest, just, passing by on his motorbike.
Right.
He mentions Assistant Superintendent Primo in connection with this one.
Wow. So it immediately brings up questions about police procedure, doesn't it? Rules of engagement.
For sure. And Hughes connects it straight back to 2012. Remember those killings in Linden?
Vaguely, yes. There was an inquiry, wasn't there?
Exactly. A commission of inquiry in 2013 had some big names on it. Top judges from the region, Claudette Singh, retired Chancellor Kennard, and they made specific recommendations back then. Things like, how police should handle protests, the need for independent investigations, essentially trying to stop this happening again.
So what Hughes is saying is those recommendations were ignored.
Pretty much. He points out that the key ones, like setting up an independent body so police don't investigate themselves, just haven't been implemented. Not by the last government, not by this one.
And now here we are in 2025, police investigating themselves again in these shootings.
Which Hughes sees as completely unacceptable, kind of reopening those old wounds for people in Linden. You have to ask, Why weren't those recommendations put in place? What were the hurdles?
It does make you wonder. Now, Hughes makes a pretty bold suggestion about payments, right?
Yeah, he does. He says the government should pay 100 million Guyana dollars ex gratia to each family right now, before any investigation starts.
100 million, ex gratia meaning sort of, a goodwill payment without admitting fault.
Exactly. It's a huge sum. And demanding it up front like that, it really signals his deep distrust in any official investigation process that might come later.
And he backs this up by pointing to the government's history.
Right. He mentions they've appealed court judgments in the past when families did win cases after police shootings. So he's painting a picture of a government reluctant to pay out or accept responsibility.
What about leadership accountability? Does he mention that?
Oh, yeah. He highlights that the police commissioner, the commanding officer, Mr. Pearlie Simon, neither has apologized, neither has resigned. And he adds that this commanding officer, Simon, was previously in charge of another region where 2 people were killed by police under, let's say, questionable circumstances. It raises flags about patterns,
Definitely. So if he distrusts the local police investigation, what about external ones? They mentioned the RSS, the regional security system.
He did, but he basically said he has zero confidence in them.
Zero. Why so skeptical?
He points to the Henry Boys case. He feels the RSS findings back then just seemed to rubber stamp what the police were saying. So he doesn't see them as truly impartial in these politically charged situations.
Okay, so if local and regional options are off the table for him, what's left?
International pressure. He talks about taking cases to the International Criminal Court, the American Human Rights Commission, getting international media involved, basically bypassing the domestic system entirely.
He even floats the idea of international sanctions against the police force itself.
Yeah, against the force and its leadership. It shows how serious he views this, the lack of other options he feels are available for getting accountability.
But he's also quite frank about the opposition's role in this, isn't he?
He is, surprisingly candid perhaps. He admits that when the APNU plus AFC coalition was in power, roughly 2015 to, maybe 2018 effectively, they didn't implement those 2013 recommendations either.
That's interesting. It adds a layer of complexity. Why didn't they do it then?
He doesn't fully explain the why in this clip, but acknowledging it is significant. It sort of preempts the criticism that they're only complaining now that they're out of power.
Right. So despite that admission, his focus now is on Linden protesting lawfully and the state needing to make that ex gratia payment.
Exactly. And he brings up something specific from that 2013 report, paragraph 187.
Okay, what did that say?
It noted a perception back then that the Guyana police force acts for the government, that it takes political direction. Hughes argues that perception is critical here. Whether it's fully true or not, if people believe the police aren't impartial, it massively undermines trust and justice.
That makes sense. Perception can become reality in terms of public trust. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The UN Forum on People of African Descent.
Yeah, Hughes wasn't happy with the presentation by Guyana's Minister of Labor there.
What was the issue?
He felt the government delegation kind of watered down the forum's purpose. Instead of focusing squarely on the achievements or challenges of people of African descent, they talked more generally about equitable development.
So diluting the focus, in his view.
That's his take. He felt it missed the specific point of the forum. He even questioned the makeup of the delegation itself.
How so?
He used this quite pointed analogy. He said it was like sending a Rastafarian representative to a very sensitive Hindu conference in New Delhi to discuss repertory rights for Hindus.
Oof, that's quite an image. The implication being the delegation wasn't suitable.
Right, that it wasn't appropriately composed to represent the specific interests the forum was about. He also hit on the lack of data in their presentation.
Data comparing different ethnic groups.
Yeah. He criticized the absence of comparative data, economic status, education levels, that sort of thing, between different groups in Guyana. He argues you need that data to have any real discussion about fairness or equitable development.
Without it, you can't measure progress or disparity.
Exactly. And this is where he pushes back against the PPP government, potentially labeling critics like him as racist for raising these points.
The racism charge.
Hughes calls it a standard tactic to shut down debate. He insists the focus should be on the facts, on the data, like who owns the major companies, who gets the gold export licenses, are Afro-Guyanese represented there proportionally? That's his point. Let the data speak.
So a very data-driven approach to equity issues from his perspective. Now, the conversation also touched on alleged abuses of power.
It did, mentioning specific cases like Arzadine Mohammed and even the host Rickford Burke's own situation, targeting political opponents, essentially.
And Hughes's take on whether the Guyanese government could influence, say, the U.S. government on this?
He was quite diplomatic there. He expressed, higher confidence in U.S. institutions like the FBI, suggesting they wouldn't be easily swayed. But it was a cautious answer.
But the specific allegation about the Attorney General misleading the U.S. was raised.
Yes, that serious claim was definitely put out there, that the AG might be feeding misinformation to U.S. authorities to go after political enemies. That's a huge allegation.
And Hughes links this potential vulnerability back to a bigger issue.
Yet the lack of strong checks and balances within Guyana's own institutions. He suggests this weakness creates an environment where abuses could happen without enough oversight. It speaks to broader systemic concerns.
Okay, let's move to the coalition talks. This is obviously crucial for the upcoming elections. What's the status?
Well, Hughes confirms they've broken down the talks between his party, the AFC, and APNU for a 2025 coalition. They're off, for now at least.
That must be a big disappointment for many opposition supporters.
He acknowledges that disappointment, yeah. And he gives credit to the negotiators on both sides, says they were competent people involved.
And his own position, he said before he'd step aside.
He repeats that. Says he's still willing to not be the presidential candidate if that's what it takes to get a unified front that can actually win. Suggests it's about the bigger picture for him.
But we don't know why the talks actually failed.
No, not the specifics. He cites the confidentiality clause in their agreement, the MOU with APNU, as preventing him from going into detail.
Which, of course, leads to speculation.
Always does. He did address some criticism the AFC got for how they announced the breakdown, though, their press conference.
What was the issue there? Timing? Content?
Both, apparently. But Hughes defends it, saying, look, the deadline was March 31st. It passed, no deal. We had a duty to tell the public what was happening.
Yeah.
It's that tension between private talks and public accountability.
Did he give any hints about? Well, acrimony. Bad blood that might hurt future cooperation.
He mentioned that he and Mr. Norton, the APNU leader, did talk directly on the morning of March 31st. They actually exchanged written positions. So, a last-minute effort at the top level.
But it didn't work. And no more talks scheduled.
Not currently scheduled, no. He says he hopes talks will resume, but nothing's planned.
Was there any talk of bringing in someone neutral, like a mediator?
Apparently not. Hughes said that option wasn't invoked, which, might seem like something they could have tried.
So what's the AFC's stance now? Go it alone?
He reaffirms their belief that a united opposition is strongest and says it's not about him being president. But yes, they're also open to talks with other smaller parties, civil society groups, keeping options open.
Okay. A couple more points Hughes touched on. Government campaigning using state resources.
Yeah, he flagged that as a familiar problem. Says it happens all the time, basically, blurring the lines between government work and party campaigning.
And the AFC solution?
Campaign finance rules.
Sure.
He says they've been calling for proper regulations for ages to try and level the playing field.
Right. And what about the PPP's recent outreach to the Afro-Guyanese community? Hughes had thoughts on that, too.
He did. He basically said it's up to individuals in that community how they respond, but he warned against, letting the government rewrite history or ignore the data on disparities just because they're making nice noises now.
Don't forget the past grievances, essentially.
Yeah, and that's where he made another striking comparison. He likened it to the honorary white citizenship status under apartheid in South Africa.
Wow. Explain that.
Well, under apartheid, sometimes a few non-white individuals were granted some limited privileges, but it didn't change the fundamentally racist system. His analogy suggests this outreach might be superficial, not addressing the core issues of inequality. It's a very strong critique.
It certainly is. Which leads to the most serious allegations discussed: apartheid and genocide. How did he handle those?
Very carefully, actually. On apartheid, he was clear. Guyana doesn't have the same legal framework as South Africa did. No codified segregation laws like that. But he argued, some PPP policies are, in his words, particularly acute, pernicious, meaning harmful, damaging, and they negatively target certain groups. So discrimination exists, maybe even systemic, but he differentiates it from the scale and legal structure of South African apartheid, like the forced removals there. It's a nuanced position.
Okay, a distinction in scale and legal form. And on the genocide question, referring to the killings of young black men.
He acknowledged the alarming number of deaths, the pattern of targeting African males. He stressed he's fought for justice in these cases. However,
he stopped short of calling it genocide.
Yes, he refrained from using that specific legal term. He noted the high bar for proving genocide, the specific intent to destroy a group. He contrasted it with situations like Gaza or historical events in places like former German Southwest Africa, where he feels that intent was perhaps more clear or documented.
So acknowledging the horror and the pattern, but careful with the legal definition of genocide.
Exactly. It highlights how complex and sensitive applying that term is.
And finally, the AFC's own plans, going forward alone.
For now, yes. He confirmed they are gearing up to launch their own campaign as a separate party. But importantly, he repeated, they remain open to alliances down the road. Things are still fluid.
Okay. So wrapping this deep dive up, we've covered a lot from this Nigel Hughes conversation. Serious concerns about police actions in Linden, the call for accountability.
Yeah, and the whole debate around representation, equitable development, both in Guyana and how it's presented internationally at places like the UN, plus those allegations of power abuse.
And the political maneuvering, the breakdown of the coalition talks, which really shapes the landscape for 2025, and those really heavy historical comparisons he made regarding discrimination.
It's a complex picture. We've tried to unpack Hughes's perspective on these interconnected issues.
Absolutely. You, our listener, wanted a deeper look at these dynamics in Guyanese politics, and hopefully exploring Hughes's views here has given a, more nuanced understanding of the current challenges.
And it leaves us with a pretty significant thought to chew on. Given all these concerns raised about the rule of law, about accountability seemingly being hard to achieve domestically, what role could international pressure or even the diaspora's engagement realistically play? Could that be a key factor in pushing for change and ensuring justice in Guyana? Something to really consider as things develop.